Now to Britain, and hot on the heels of a spending review that has slashed its way through the public sector, today it's the UK banks' turn to find out how hard they'll be hit as the government looks to squeeze financial services for a contribution to its empty coffers. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined live by David Buik from BCG Partners. David, Chancellor George Osborne says he wants to extract the maximum sustainable tax revenues from financial services. Can this keep London competitive?
Good evening, Tiki. No, I think he's completely misguided on this. I think what the government needs to understand is that if they want to iron out the budget deficits, they need as much taxation as they possibly can. And banks are the artery to recovery, because they will create opportunities for people to be employed, to pay income tax, for companies to pay corporation tax, and for people who make money, capital gains. And if you stunt this, which the government is in danger of doing by putting in a bank levy which will probably be done on an annualised basis for 5 years, something like 10 basis points on the value of the assets less the cost of Tier 1 capital, which in isolation is not too bad, but our concern is that the government will take away incentive, and this could be desperate.
I guess the problem here is the political balance. On the one hand, there have been huge cuts to the public sector. The government has to be seen to be doing something in a way to sort of, kick the banks, if you like, from the public's point of view.
It's political expediency. You're 100% right. But what I'd like to see is a little bit more pragmatism. I think the market accepted the cuts, and they were vicious cuts yesterday, because the gilt market was very positive in its response. But what we did miss, Tiki, slightly, was what is going to happen to do with growth. Now, we had some infrastructure spending on things like Crossrail going across London, the M25, which is the motorway which goes around our country, and various other transport. But that isn't enough. And we need to see the export market driven hard. The only people who are going to provide money for that are going to be the banks. So if you strangle them, it is going to badly affect the growth period, and whereby people find bonus checks absolutely unacceptable at the level. There has been some internal controls on that, and it's far better to have 40% of a hell of a lot payable to the Exchequer than 50% reluctantly, with a lot of people heading off hot foot for the Far East or for the shores of Lake Lucerne.
I suppose the Chancellor does have a bit of a backstop here. You mentioned the infrastructure spending, but there's also signs that the Bank of England would actually look at quantitative easing if things got too hard.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. The only really dissenting voice is Andrew Sentance, and he is one for putting up interest rates which we just couldn't sustain in this country. On the other side, Adam Posen really wants to introduce more quantitative easing now, and the other 7 members are slightly undecided, but if a push came to a shove, I think they'd be very much into it. Dr. Mervyn King described the next decade as one of a sober nature, and he's absolutely right. And he understands above all else that we need to get the private sector going. We've created 300,000 jobs in the private sector in the last year and 178,000 in the last quarter, which is good news, but we mustn't let the momentum stop. And any kind of stifling of growth, such as slamming banks for political expediency rather than for pragmatism, I think would be met with great disappointment.
But you say the market actually has handled this quite well.
Very well. The gilt market hasn't moved, which means they realise the medicine that they have to dish out. The cost of borrowing hasn't gone up, which is extremely good news. The pound fell just very marginally, about 0.5% against the dollar, but that was really more due to the lack of what we could see as opportunities for growth. We felt that this was just lacking a little bit in the Chancellor's presentation. But on the whole, we're steady as she goes. The third quarter earnings season right across the spectrum looks like 85% of companies are reporting better than expected figures. So there's no question of any doubt about it. Equities at the moment is the kiddie on the block to watch. Other alternative asset classes are deeply unattractive at the moment, as many of these companies are paying dividends.
And just on currencies, I see Governor Mervyn King has called for a grand bargain on global exchange rates, and that global leaders need to act in the collective interest. How do you think things are going to go at the finance meeting over the weekend for G20?
I understand him, I hear him, it's the same hymn sheet as Tim Geithner and many other people are singing from. It lacks, as I say, a really sensible approach. Until economies such as the United States and the United Kingdom clean up their act in terms of budget deficit and borrowing requirements, I'm afraid the Chinese and the Japanese and others with huge budget surplus, they're in the driving seat.
All right, David Buik, sad day for aircraft carriers, but thank you very much for talking to us from London.
Pleasure.